What's up, everybody? Episode 74 of All Out War. Thanks for tuning in to us. We appreciate it. I'm Turner, and I'm in the studio with Rosie. What's up, Rosie?
Hey, man. What's up?
Yeah. We are, this is March, our first podcast in March.
Yeah.
Today is March 1st. Yesterday was a leap year.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of weird. We won't have another one of those for 4 years.
Yeah.
And my friend had a baby.
Yesterday?
Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome.
So it will be 1 year old in 4 years.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I saw some picture of, it was really cute, a hospital. I don't know if it's like I've since moved into a new decade of, I'm no longer in my 20s.
Right.
I'm now 30.
Yeah.
Then maybe all of a sudden stuff that I didn't care about, or like, I think it's that fatherly instinct coming in, stuff that I never noticed before.
Yeah.
But anyway, I saw this and I was like, oh, that's cute. And I never would have said that before. But I saw this picture of like a hospital that they dressed up all the babies that were born yesterday in frog onesies for a leap year.
Oh, okay.
And I was like, that's really cute.
That's funny.
Yeah.
You're gay. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
Wait a second. What?
Why are you gay?
I don't know.
Dude, what we haven't done in 2020.
Smoking that sticky green stuff.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's back.
We're
back.
It never left.
I feel like we're back, man.
Yeah.
It's been, January lasted forever. February flew like crazy.
Mm-hmm.
We only had 2 episodes in January. Here we are in March, and now we're getting ready to kick it off.
Yeah.
I'm excited about the spring. I'm excited about the podcast in the spring and going forward.
Yeah.
We got some new stuff in our own personal lives. And this episode of the podcast,
Yeah.
by the way, is going to be talking about basically Christians and hardship.
Yeah.
How do we deal with hardship? So if you are going through a difficult time or you know somebody, this would be one you want to listen to.
Hopefully.
Hopefully.
We're saying that with a lot of, before it. So hopefully it will, we're putting that good vibe out into the universe.
That's right. That's right.
We're focusing on
what? We don't do that
intentions.
good vibe. We don't do all that. Just in thoughts and prayers. Thoughts and vibes.
Live, laugh, love.
There you go. That's right.
Positive energies.
Oh my. Did you even listen to the yoga one we had our last episode?
Nope.
Okay. Anyways, you were there with us, but
I was.
say, what do you know, man?
Hey, did you know that the Holy Roman Empire and the Republic of the Seven Netherlands got into a war? It lasted a day, and it was called the Kettle War because the only shot fired hit a soup kettle.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So it was the Roman Empire.
Yeah. It was October 8th, 1784, right after the Netherlands got their independence.
The Roman
from
Empire
Spain.
was still in existence in the 1700s?
Yeah.
I did not know that.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, so this was after the Dutch revolt.
Okay.
The Dutch used to be a Spanish colony from Spain,
Yeah.
so they revolted and then got into conflict.
Gotcha.
But,
Okay.
Yeah. So there you go, the Kettle War.
The Kettle War.
Well, how about another one?
Sure.
All right.
I love
that was
the-
kind of yeah.
I like that one.
All right,
That was
yeah.
cool.
Did you know that? You remember the game Neopets?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
You know that it was connected to Scientology.
Oh, great.
Yeah,
My kids had those.
I played it.
Oh, man.
Yeah, I had friends that still played it like in their 20s,
Oh,
like
man.
6 years ago.
Got some power behind that game, huh?
I had some really nerdy friends. I still have. But yeah. Anyway, so the Neopets, yeah, it was the Scientologist thing.
Wow. Okay.
So there you go. I hope I've ruined your childhood. Can't have any nice things anymore.
There you go.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's get into this podcast. So sit back, grab a coffee, and enjoy.
You're listening to the All Out War podcast.
Yes, you are.
I didn't know you were going to play that.
I was just taking care of all the birds with one stone, bro. We
Cool.
rolled our intro in.
Yeah.
So, anyways, man,
So,
we kind of let the cat out of the bag earlier and said we're talking about Christians in hardship. And this is one of those ones where we've had a couple of these. It's like a question, how do I deal with this? How do I do? I remember you had one. We had one a few months ago about how do I handle when God doesn't answer my prayers? And our podcast was created on the premise of theology, politics, and culture. Yeah. And we've used tremendous liberties. Obviously,
I don't know if we talked a lot about any of those,
but we've had Cabot on.
Yeah, we've had political guests.
Lots of political guests. We've done a lot of theology. We did end time series. We did we've done like other stuff.
Aliens, which is clearly within all three of those.
That's right. That's right.
Maybe we should just go ahead and say that it just sounds catchy, but it doesn't necessarily.
Oh, the three.
Yeah.
Yeah. It helps people understand like what they might
what
get
we're about. Yeah.
Yeah. But it all works.
Yeah, I guess that's true. Yeah.
But yeah, so this is one of those ones where it's more theological and a little bit. Hopefully, it'll be encouraging. That's my hope.
Yeah.
I do happen to have a handful of friends that are going through some really difficult times right now, and they're mature believers, and so I'm not concerned that they're going to abandon their faith or anything like that. But my heart goes out to them, because it's painful to watch someone that you care about go through a difficult season.
Yeah.
In life, and so we just wanted to talk about it. And you and I both have been through some difficulties, currently, recently, and no doubt in the future. Well, you're not immune to it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Exactly.
So, so I'll just start with a scripture verse. How's that?
Yeah, that'd be good.
So Colossians chapter 1, verse 24. Paul writes, he says, "For I am glad when I suffer for you in my body, for I am participating in the sufferings of Christ that continue for his body, the church." And so, and then he goes on to say, God has given me the responsibility of serving his church by proclaiming his entire message to you. So he connects suffering that Paul had exclusive and very intimate relationship with in his ministry and life, with Christ, his connection with Christ, because he says that I am participating in the sufferings of Christ, and he says the purpose behind it is for Christ's body, the church. And so I think that's an important. I wanted to kick off with that.
Yeah. Well, how about I'll take that, since that was a question that I was going to have. A good way to roll into it.
Yeah.
So, very basically, why do Christians suffer?
Mm-hmm.
So maybe that's why. Because Jesus called us. At least all the apostles, except for John, right, that were martyred, died.
Yeah.
Because
the original
John,
12.
But I mean, all throughout the early church, this was not an easy life. Becoming a Christian that most points throughout history has never been like an easy thing. But Jesus himself said that we're not called to. This is not the easy way. It's not the easier, softer way.
Yeah.
In many cases.
Yeah.
So, why do Christians suffer?
Yeah, it's various reasons. I think there's a handful of reasons, personally. Mm-hmm. I think one of the first things that you want to understand is that a Christian is not, first of all, we're not immune, as I just said, we're not immune to suffering. There is a belief that when you accept Christ, that there is some sort of immunity that happens for tragedy and difficulties and hardship. And if you're honest, you realize pretty quickly that that's just not the case. Mm-hmm. And so, and sadly, there's theological dispositions that would say otherwise. They would say, oh, well, if you're experiencing sickness or if you're experiencing hardship, difficulty, your faith is weak.
Yeah.
And that's just, what I just read in Colossians just totally puts that on its face, because Paul said, I'm actually partaking in the sufferings of Christ. Like Christ suffered.
Yeah.
And because I'm identified with him, I will suffer as well. And some of your versions, I'm reading the NLT version because I just got a new Bible and I'm reading the NLT. I don't know what everyone else reads, but I picked one of these up and I'm enjoying it.
Nice, yeah.
Yeah, I'm enjoying it. But there's another verse I want to read.
Yeah.
It's out of 2 Timothy. It's chapter 4, verse 5. And Paul was talking, I'll read a little bit before. He says, I urge you in the presence of God and Christ Jesus, who will someday judge the living and the dead when he comes to set up his kingdom. Preach the word of God. Be prepared whether the time is favorable or not. Patiently correct, rebuke, and encourage your people with good teaching. He's talking to Timothy as a pastor. And he says, for a time is coming when people will no longer listen to sound and wholesome teaching. They will follow their own desires and will look for teachers who will tell them whatever their itching ears want to hear. They will reject the truth and chase after myths. And then this is what I like. He says, but you should keep a clear mind in every situation. Don't be afraid of suffering for the Lord. Work at telling others the good news and fully carry out the ministry that God has given you. So,
you know, it's interesting. So I'm just thinking, like when you're saying that, you know, some Christians today might think that if they're not suffering, or, you know, if they are suffering, that their faith is not strong.
Yeah.
That, like, it was probably the reverse back then. Like these Christian, the early church probably viewed it as if they were not suffering, they weren't doing it right.
Right.
So like, you know, one of those things like it,
yeah,
and again, they all knew
probably true
that it, yeah,
that's a really good, yeah. And,
you know, if I'm not, and I don't want to compare it like nowadays, you
right.
know what I mean?
Right.
Because it's totally not fair, but it's, I don't know. It's one of those things, follow me on this tangent, if you will.
Yeah. Yeah.
Indulge me. Like there's this thing, you know, how, conservatives and like right wingers are getting banned from social media and all that stuff.
Yeah.
There's kind of like this joke going around where they're like, oh, you're still on Twitter? You're not that conservative then.
Oh, right.
You know what I mean? Because like,
yeah. You haven't been banned yet?
Yeah. You haven't been banned yet. You haven't been suspended. Like, you know, it's like it's like a badge of honor that you're really conservative or right wing.
Yeah.
And, I don't want to say nowadays is like, not to relate, but, you know, almost as like, if you're not suffering on social media, you know, there's like this,
on social media,
or,
right?
you know,
yeah.
like this thing, like you're not being if you're not being banned because they hate Christians on, you know, stuff, and you're not proclaiming the gospel and all this stuff. It's just kind of in that same way that they're like the stigma of, oh, you're safe or whatever.
Yeah.
So I wonder if, yeah, it's just interesting.
Yeah, that's interesting. You know what else is interesting is early church had a dilemma.
Yeah.
When people would defect in faith, and so they would convert, and then persecution would come, hardships would come, and they would flee, and they'd go back to their old life.
Yeah.
What do they do when they came back? So like the persecution would cease for a season or whatever, and then they would come back and want to fellowship with the church. And the dilemma for the early church was, do we let them back in? Were they really converted? What do we do? And it was like, was it a false conversion? Because they ran, you know?
Yeah.
And they abandoned, or some of them outright denied, you know? And the end result was that they let them back in. That's what they decided to do, was let them back in, which is the right thing to do. Right?
Yeah.
You know, prove your stripes, boy. You
yeah,
know,
exactly.
Where are you? But I think that, you know, this is one of the very first things that God permitted the church to do, was to endure hardship, was to face difficulties. One of the very first things, like as soon as Jesus rose from the dead, almost immediately they started facing obstacles and opposition and hardships. And so it's not something that has ever been absent from the church.
Yeah.
But what's crazy, and I think the Lord knows this about us, obviously, because he knows everything. But what is interesting is that I think he knows how we're going to handle it.
Yeah.
And what our minds are going to go to, and how we're going to respond. Mm-hmm. And so I love how he prepared and tried to prepare the church for this, because he told them, like, in this world you'll have trouble, but take heart, I've overcome the world. You know, that's one of my favorite verses out of the Gospel of John.
Yeah.
You know, and he said things to them in reference to, hey, you're going to have, it's not going to be a cakewalk. And so your first question was, why does persecution happen, or why does hardship come, and why does trouble come in the life of a believer? And so the first thing that I want to say is that I think one of the premier reasons that hardships come into the life of a believer is because Jesus wants us to be like him, and he's trying to make the believer become more like him. He's trying to allow their life and their circumstances of their life, their situations, their hardships, the things that they're dealing with, whether it's health issues, whether it's marriage issues like relationships, whether it's finances, any number of things. It could be even a faith crisis in some ways. These hardships, they come in with the purpose, with an end goal of becoming more like Jesus when it's had its way.
Yeah.
When the hardship has seen its way through your life and you're on the other side of it, the goal of the Holy Spirit is to make you more like God, make you more like Jesus, and reflect him and have more of his nature ruling you. Yeah.
I was going to say, so I apologize about that, the first segue I had. I totally lost my train of thought when
the dogs.
We heard dogs. We heard the dogs. That's why all of a sudden I lost my.
And I apologize to the listener. My dogs, they're little dogs and they bark, and if they have excellent hearing.
Yeah.
And so if they hear something outside, they just start barking.
Yeah. And so I apologize for my idiotic thing that I just.
But they are cute dogs.
They are cute. I was going to say, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I've always heard this analogy that I've kind of taken in my life, and so I would posit that another thing. So Christians would suffer to be more like Christ, and I was going to say, and also a suffering to bring us closer to him.
Yeah.
And so this thing that someone told me many years ago that like I said, I've held on to and made it become my own almost. You know what I mean? Like I stole this idea.
Yeah.
And so I'll talk about it. And it's basically this idea of a rear view mirror, right? And or this idea of being able to look back in my own life. So I'll just use the last, 10 years for an example or something like that. And there's a lot of stuff when I would come to a new situation that I had absolutely no idea how I'd be able to get through it. And it, I was 20 years old, 10 years ago. And so there was stuff when I was, this sounds so silly, but like for an example of like something that wasn't a big deal, I never knew how to quit a job on favorable terms. And I'm very non-confrontational.
Yeah.
Like by nature, I'm kind of a sissy.
Okay.
I'm a big softy. I'm a big sissy.
Yeah.
When it comes to confrontation. So like a big thing for me at the beginning, it just was like, I don't know how to quit a job on favorable terms. And I was scared. And like, there was times where I remember I would be just deathly anxious. Like I didn't know, it really was all or nothing. Like I need you, God, to help me get through this. And that sounds so silly. And then there's stuff that would happen and I would get through it obviously and I'd be fine. And then there's other things like when, like in the last 10 years, I've had a lot of friends die, you know what I mean? And there's a lot of stuff that like I didn't know how I was going to be able to get through it, and and not in any way to like demean, I don't mean that, but I mean like there's like real stuff that happens over the course of years and stuff like that. And, so these situations that I didn't know how I was going to be able to get through or like literally survive, like I don't know what to do. I don't know how I'm going to get through this. I can't do it on my own. And, there's this saying, God never gives us more than we can handle, which is not biblical. And it's not in the
It's not even true, right?
It's not true. Yeah, because he gives us stuff all the time that we can't handle. And
on purpose.
On purpose, so that it can prove that we need him. We can't do it on our own. We literally can't do it on our own. So he gives us more than we can handle all the time to prove that we're feeble, broken, creatures that can't do anything on our own. So anyway, the whole point with this rearview mirror thing is like now I had enough of these situations that I literally I had no idea how to get through. You know what I mean? I did not know the next step, how to start doing anything, in regards to these situations, how I was going to get through them, how I was going to emotionally survive. There's some, stuff that it got dark, there's things like losing best friends and stuff like that. And not that it makes it any easier with death or anything, but just a good example I think of is that now, the more times that I went through all those things, and I had to truly just give everything up to God and be like, God, you need to carry me. Like the footprints on the beach, you need to totally just carry me. I'm a baby. I can't do anything. I need you and everything. And the more times that he continuously showed up, and I don't mean this in a kind of way of like judging God as if he wouldn't show up.
Right.
But go with me. The number of times he always brought me through all these difficult times, the more I can look into the future and remember that all those times I never thought I could get through, the worst thing that happened at that point in my life,
right.
This unclimbable mountain that he brought me over.
Yeah.
Like I have a track record. I have a practical way of looking back in my life and seeing that he's carried me out of 100 times that I needed him. Chances are he's probably going to carry me out of this 101st. You know what I mean?
Right.
So it's that was a really long analogy, but so is that accurate that he, allows suffering to happen so that we can turn to him and grow our faith in him? Because the more that he, practically he shows up and that the faith is like a muscle. It needs to be strained and then rebuilt.
Yeah. It's totally to turn the believer back to God. Like, I mean, we're supposed to be looking towards him anyways. And when hardship comes, it should cause us to lean into him even more. But, our human nature it just goes against that. It's like, oh, I need to figure out, like some people immediately turn to another person.
Yeah.
Oh, I need wisdom from somebody else, like that will tell me what to do, how to handle it. So give me an answer, Other people will like just grind it out. I'll just endure this in myself. Like I will make it through. I don't care. The whole world could come against me. I'm going to make it. That's not what the Lord wants either. He does tell us to endure, these hardships, like a good soldier. Mm-hmm. Like Paul says that in 2 Timothy. He says, like his whole life has been poured out like a drink offering. And, he's at the end of his life and he's like, endure, and encourages Timothy, endure hardship. Yeah. Like a good soldier, like do it well. And I think that the purpose in the design is that for a believer, it'd be lean into him more. Mm-hmm. Not be your own strength, not be someone else's strength, but his strength, God's strength. And that's where it gets really hard because there's like an internal conflict that I get when I start to have a hardship and I'm thinking, but God, you caused this. Yeah. Like what in the world? Why are you letting this happen? Like I don't get it. I don't understand it. And there's literally been prayers that I've had during really hard times where I've been like, God, I don't understand. And I don't know if I ever understand. And guess what? Here's the thing. God doesn't owe me an explanation. Yeah. He doesn't owe any man an explanation. Job could have said the same things. If you read the book of Job, he could have said the same things. He could have been like, God, and he did, question God. And God's response to him was, where were you? Where were you when I made this and when I did that, when I put the stars into place, when I put the foundations of the earth down? Where were you? And he has this response back to Job to get him back in the right alignment and understand of who's God and who's not God. Yeah, yeah. And I think that is a great place for us to be. Now, obviously, there's not been another human being that I know of that suffered like Job. Yeah. But all suffering is painful. We're not, we shouldn't even equate it because something that you go through might be really hard for you, but for me, it may not be that difficult. Mm-hmm. But something that I go through, you might breeze through. You know what I mean? Where I would want to collapse under it. Everybody's got different strengths and different,
And I guess I was going to say to go with that, that just shows that the reason that everyone's made differently. And, maybe even where it talks about, to come to where the Bible tells us to come together where they, to join in fellowship. And I was thinking immediately of the analogy of the body, right? Like an eye, is useless to a hand, like all these things, but at the same time, they all need one another. Right. But everyone's made differently. And that's why we're called to remain in fellowship and walk with each other, so that, because if everyone had the same weakness or the same, like if Satan could figure out, all I have to do is just make sure,
just this one thing,
this one particular thing. And I mean, granted, there are some universal things that people like, some people may be able to handle financial stress, right? But financial stress is going to stress everyone in the world out.
It's a stress,
it's a stress. But some people may be able to handle it better than others. And I was just going to say, being in a community of Christians, that's where you could go, and God places people in our lives. Oh, well, I'm just really bad at finance. I can't. I'm stressed about this. Well, go see. There's a guy at church that's like a financial planner. He can walk you through the practical steps of doing this or that. Yeah. Or I just find it's funny how everything has a purpose when you look, kind of step back a little bit also. And that's where the differences and the uniquenesses of individuals become kind of beautiful, like a tapestry.
Yeah. Well, and the key word there was community. Yeah. And this is it. And that's a big thing too. So the first thing, the design is, and maybe we're getting ahead of ourselves, but the design of hardship and suffering is to make us more like Christ. Yeah. And draw us into him more. So maybe draw us more into him first, and then secondly, become more like him. And then there is a third, and these aren't really in any, maybe I shouldn't try and put them in an order. Yeah. But these are aspects. Yeah. So I'll take that back a little bit. But what I was thinking was that you said community, and that's vital, man. There was a verse in Corinthians that I was looking for while you were talking when you mentioned it to me. It's 2 Corinthians 1, verse 4. It says, we've experienced the comforts of God. Actually, I want to read it. But basically, in essence, what community does is it allows us not only to experience comfort from somebody else, but it also allows us to be used by God to comfort someone else, right, and have an experience of purpose that we maybe never have experienced before or haven't been able to experience.
Yeah, I was just thinking of, that's really interesting the way you phrase that. I was just thinking, I don't know, my brain went back to this of someone might find their profession or their calling, maybe not calling, but to be like a tax accountant, you know what I mean? And then you think, you're like, oh, how do I glorify God being a tax accountant, or I'm not, this doesn't, I don't bring glory to God doing this, or, this is kind of worthless. I'm not a preacher. I'm not, doing this. I can't leave a Bible study or something like that. But, that savviness with money, if you're able to help somebody else from the church, you can see how your blessings can be brought out on a date, in a real practical way. You know what I mean? So I guess, does that make sense?
Yeah, no, totally. Let me read this verse to you. All right. 2 Corinthians 1:4. Let's see here. It says, he comforts us in all of our troubles so that we can comfort others when they have trouble. We will be able to give them the same comfort God has given us. For the more we suffer for Christ, the more God will shower us with his comfort through Christ. Even when we are weighed down with troubles, it is for your comfort and salvation. For we ourselves are comforted, and we certainly will comfort you. So that's what I was talking about. That's community. So you can't experience that if you're isolated out. And one of our tendencies is when we start to go through hardships is to think that nobody understands, nobody cares, and we get self-pity and we isolate out and we kind of go into a shell. And I think some of that is necessary. I need a little bit of time to, when I'm in the middle of something hard, I need a little bit of time to kind of figure some stuff out. Get my head wrapped around, okay.
I mean, retreat into a place where it's just you.
Yeah, I think I need to think it through a little bit.
Yeah.
But if I stay there, then what I'm doing is that whole 2 Corinthians 1 verse 4 is not going to be able to be applicable to my life. Like I'm not going to be able to be comforted, by somebody else who's been through these type of things before.
Yeah.
And experienced how God walked them through it. And they were the perfect example of this is, you were talking about death earlier, and there's never really the right words to say to someone when, who's lost a loved one. And someone told me when I became a pastor early on, he said to me, look, just the best thing you can say sometimes is, I'm so sorry. And I hurt for you. And I was like, that is so weak. I'm like, come on, man. Isn't there a great verse? Like, isn't there a good scripture verse that we could read to somebody? And he's like, no, it's not going to help them. And there are some great, wonderful verses that connect with death for a believer that are really encouraging. Like, we don't mourn like the rest of the world, for we know that we will see our loved ones again, and because he lives, we will live, and there's these wonderful reunions that we can experience in heaven with our loved ones in Christ. But those don't matter in those moments necessarily. They're not going to bring it. But what does matter is when you say, I'm so sorry. Like, this is horrible. This absolutely sucks.
Yeah.
This sucks. And that identification with them is comfortable. It brings comfort. And so I think that when Paul was writing that in Corinthians, to 2 Corinthians, they were in need of hearing that. Mm-hmm. And the church was being persecuted as well, so that helps out too. But so suffering is designed to make us more like Jesus, to cause us to trust more in the Lord, to lean into Him, and to really draw from community.
Yeah.
So that we can receive that support, that help, that strength. I mean, if you've ever gone through a really hard time, there's nothing more. You don't feel more loved than when somebody just sends a text. Hey man, I was praying for you this morning. How you doing? Hope you're doing okay. And they're not even asking for details. They're just like, hey, I'm thinking of you and praying for you. Yeah. Because a lot of times, no human can change your circumstances anyways. So,
yeah,
it's like I want you to be out of this hardship that you're in, but
I can't do anything.
I can't. If I could snap my fingers and make this go away, I would do it, but I can't. So I'm just want to check in on you. You're not ready to jump off the ledge, are you? You're not.
Right.
All sharp objects are in the drawer, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, for real.
Yeah. No.
So, yeah. So I think that's another aspect of it is to enhance community,
mm-hmm.
and that's a whole nother topic that we've never really talked about. But community is vital for Christians, and it's vulnerable, and it can be a little dicey.
Yeah. Well, how about since that's such a big topic, why don't we dive into it a little bit if you want?
Yeah.
So like what,
sure.
Since we talked about it a lot, what are we called? Cause I was going to say one of the questions, I think you answered it, before I even had to ask it, was, what's the responsibility, or as a Christian who sees, a brother suffering, what should they do? And you kind of laid that out, but what is the idea of the community? What is it supposed to look like?
Yeah. Well, it varies. There's a lot of variables. So depending, like, I'll just start with like your age. Mm-hmm. Like I'm going to be 50, and the community that I need around me is going to be different than someone who's even 30 or even in their 20s. Their community is going to be a little bit different, I think. But Paul does give instructions pretty clearly in the scriptures where he talks about, older men, instruct the younger men how to be brave and how to obey their parents, and older women instruct the younger women how to not be busybodies and how to be, how to
right.
be at home serving their husbands.
How to make a good sandwich.
Yeah, right. And there's nothing ashamed in that, man. That is like, anyways, Beth Moore just rolled over. She's not dead, but anyways, my point is this, is that there's instructions on what community should look like and in the scriptures, and that's a whole big topic that I'm not prepared to unpack because I haven't studied it. But what I will say is I think it varies in different ages and different times of seasons of life. You know, like I have teenagers, so some of the fellowship that I need right now, the community that I need right now, are people that are in the middle of that as well, and they're experiencing victories, and maybe they're not, and so they're like able to like hold my arms up a little bit, and or they've been through it. You know, maybe they're a little bit past that and they've had some success or some failures, and they can say, hey, look, I was right like what you're doing. I would not do what you're doing. Yeah. It didn't work well.
Yeah. So how about I'll phrase it like this. So, you know, the point I'm trying to get across is like since we're going to suffer, what should so like some good things for a Christian, I'm just trying to think of like some bullet points. Yeah. It's like, what kind of community? So I'm talking for someone that may not have, they're thinking like, I don't even know how to, who to have, or I only have people my own age, or I only have this, I only have that, I only have that. So they never even get the community around them to help them when they're suffering, or they don't know how to help someone else when they're suffering. They're not.
So I've got a couple rules of thumb about like, how do I measure that? How do I, what are parameters? So number one, less is more. This is just something that I've and I'm an extrovert, which means so as an extroverted person, I'm not an Enneagram. I don't know what my Enneagram number is, but as an extrovert, my extroversion is typical to have a lot of very thin relationships. So I have a lot of relationships, but none of them go deep. But in this situation, when it comes to what I would consider quality, is less is more. So you have to reduce that down, if you're an extrovert, to a few very trusted and mature believers.
Yeah. Can I make a point?
Yeah.
I was going to say, I know one of the most important things that maybe that I've learned, and I don't want to speak like I have a lot of wisdom, but so take it for what it's worth, is that if you ask for opinions from 100 people, you might, if you have an answer in your head already, and you ask 100 people, you could maybe find enough people that can talk, can agree with what you want to happen anyways, totally. In a general way. And in the same way, you can get a multitude of advice from people that may not know you very well. So, to be there with you when you're struggling. So I was just going to make a point is that it's more important. I just see that, I'll just say it like this because I'm trying to tippy-toe around it.
Well, we don't need a tippy-toe, man.
Yeah.
There's no need to tippy-toe.
So here's this thing. Don't go telling everybody what you're going through, okay? That's what I was going to say.
That does help.
I'm thinking of something in particular that someone was talking to me about, and I felt really blessed, like I was like, oh, I can't believe this person is
sharing
talking.
That. Yeah,
okay, let me, how can I help? Let's get down to it. And I said something, and they were like, oh yeah, that's what all these other people, and they started naming off all these other people had told them. And I'm like, how many people have you talked to about this? And they're like, oh, I don't know, like 10. I'm like, how long? I'm like, you're telling all your business to everyone
in like a couple days. Yeah.
Yeah. And so one of the things was, keep it private. That's not something,
right.
I just caution people that find people that you trust that really, go through it, and because then it just can cause so much more issues.
Yeah.
If you're struggling because, you're dating someone and they cheated on you, you probably shouldn't go, you should probably talk to a couple close friends that really know both of you guys in a relationship.
Yeah.
Right. And can speak truth and guidance and be there and knows intimate details, intimacy, real intimacy, which is, the nakedness of the soul. You know what I mean? Like there's the
I hear you.
like that. But in a very practical way, you know, that's going to bring you more troubles if you just start going around saying, "Oh, my boyfriend is like cheated on me, or my girlfriend cheated on me,"
or
with
Facebook. You put it on,
put it on Facebook,
tweet it
or
out,
something like
yeah.
that. You know, to get sympathy, or, you know, like all that stuff.
Yeah.
And so, don't do that.
Yeah. So, I would say this too, like, and that's excellent, man. That's great. What you just said is fantastic. Less is more in the sense of, and I would also say variety helps. So,
Yeah.
like I have a friend, so I have a friend of mine, a very close brother in the Lord, who's probably 20 years older than me.
Mm-hmm.
And then I have some guys my age, and then I have guys that are younger than me. And what you're doing is you're creating a flow.
Yep.
And so some of these relationships, I'm more of the giver than I am the receiver. Other ones, it's a little bit of like, we're both like, I don't know what the heck we're doing, whatever, you know. And then the other ones, it's like, he's more than willing to say, share as a father would, you know, to his son or something like that. And I think that's how you want to build it. Mm-hmm. And so, like, you know, I don't want to like poop on the church or anything like that, but we haven't done a big service for ourselves when we take all of our middle school kids and plop them into one room, and all of our high school kids plop them in another room, and then all of our, you know, college age kids in another room, and everybody else gets to go in the big room, you know, the main church or whatever. But everyone can go in the main church if they want, but we've got this set aside for you. And I understand the wisdom in that, because it's like we can teach them at their level, and definitely for younger kids like elementary and even up into middle school, I think it's okay. But there is something about having high school and up around people that are a little bit older. It's just something about it. They actually will mature quicker. They'll learn from them, both good and bad.
Yeah.
And I think that helps. So sometimes I don't think the church has done the best job in promoting this. And then we tell people, oh, get into a small group. And then we put everybody in a small group that's exactly alike.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's even the best either. I understand the logic behind it. Like-minded, like
going through the same stuff, you know.
Yeah. And hopefully you got a good leader that can, you know, walk them through it,
yeah.
you know, miraculously, even though that leader's dealing with the same junk.
Yeah.
But I think when you look at the way the Bible has outlined it, older men pour into younger men, you know, younger men go to the older men. You respect your elders. There's this whole community that's interactive in that way. And so for me, less is more. And number two, I would say in that community, when you're trying to figure out like, how do I tell, what do I get from? I think humility is another one that's a keynote. Finding people that are humble and that you yourself are humble. And the second one is the latter one's a lot harder.
Yeah.
It's hard for us to be humble, but finding people that are humble is important, because you don't want somebody, when you start telling them what's going on in your life, or you're going to them, that they're going to get a big head about it, or think that they have some authority over you or control over you or whatever, you know. And that takes a little bit of time. Sometimes you think you may have found somebody, and then you realize this is not that guy, or that this is not that woman, you know, that I should be. Oh, that's the other thing. I think dudes should talk to dudes, and women should talk to women. Very rare occasion should it be crossed over, you know, but typically I think it's a rule of thumb. It's a little bit
smart.
Yeah, I mean, like if I'm going to talk to you about a hardship I'm going through with something, you know. But like for me, for instance, so, you know, Rosie, like my first person is my wife.
Yeah.
That I'm going to talk to.
Yeah.
She's the first one. She knows everything. She knows what's going on. She's going to be the first one all the time. But there's things that she's not going to want to even to talk about with me.
Yeah.
Not because she doesn't care, but because it's one of those things where it's like, that's a dude's thing. You need to go talk to a guy, you know? And just like, I'm not necessarily wanting to hear everything, you know, that there's certain things that she's going to want to talk about with someone, and I'm not the best person.
Yeah.
So, and I'm okay with that, you know, that's fine. But anyway, so yeah, if someone who's looking for community, those are the type of things you want to look for. Don't necessarily just stick with that one group that is exactly like you. That's not necessarily the best, you know, route to go.
Yeah.
And I could be wrong on all of this. Community's hard.
Yeah.
It's hard, man. It's hard to find people that you're willing to walk a long period of time with, through life. And sometimes you get blessed and you find someone, one or two people, and you can hang with them, and they can see you on your ugly side, and they're not going to ditch you and talk about you behind your back. They're always going to think best of you and know that there's a part of you that's better maybe than what you're living up to,
Yeah. Like I was just thinking, like there's maybe a handful, like less than 5 guys in my life that know like literally everything about me. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And my inner circle, I was just gonna say, like, it was cool this week, without going into details, but and trying to circle back to like maybe the suffering a little bit, was it's important for me. Like, I value these guys, and like, I texted 2 of them, and we got on the phone right away, talked for an hour. We haven't, things have been busy, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. And we caught up, and it was just like they knew exactly about me, and like I felt so much better, and they're going through stuff, and we could relate, and it was just like those relationships are like, I was going to say they've been harnessed over years.
Yeah.
So I want to say, like, I didn't get discouraged, don't get discouraged for someone that doesn't have that. Like, it takes time, and getting vulnerable with someone.
Yeah.
Like, building that real intimacy and relationship. I was going to say, so here's another question maybe to segue to it. And maybe, I don't think it's repeating the same kind of question of that other episode we did about, unanswered prayers, or when we're going through it. So what are we to do in a practical way when we are suffering? And I don't want to, what do we do if like it just sucks?
Yeah.
I mean, what are like some things like I don't know. I'm trying not to say any detail.
No, I know
any
what
things, but like, what do we do in a very practical way, just to like, okay, what's the next step? What's this?
Right.
What's that? What do I do?
Well, the first thing I would encourage any individual to do is so you're not going to try and do this on your own.
Yeah.
You're going to involve a couple people around you in this hardship that they'll pray for you, they'll counsel you, they'll check in on you. But you don't want to take matters into your own hands necessarily. That can lead down a really bad road.
Yeah.
If you're struggling with, loneliness, the last thing you want to do is go try and find a quick hookup.
Yeah.
Which is a very common tendency. Oh, I'm so lonely, I just want to be with somebody, and then Tinder, boom, next thing you know, you regret. And it could be a big regret.
Yeah.
If you're not careful. So what I would say is that when you're dealing with some of these hardships and things like that, you want to have your life accountable to somebody. Mm. So don't just jump out on your own and try and handle it on your own. And so that's all kind of like connecting all those things together.
Yeah.
The other is that, Ephesians chapter 6, Paul talks about spiritual warfare. And a lot of times when we're in a moment of weakness and we're in a broken state because of hardship, because of pain, because of suffering, Satan loves to just fly in those moments and try and take advantage of us in that broken and down state. And Paul says, put on the armor, first of all. And then at the end of, I love it, and at the end of Ephesians 6, he says, after having done all to stand. And so I would say, don't give up. Don't give up, just live it day by day. Walk through it day by day. And someone told me this in the middle of a hardship that I went through a few years ago, and I would start to overthink, and then what I would do is then I would project my fears out into the future.
Yep. And
projecting is something that we do naturally. We just do it, and it's almost like a way of us. I don't know necessarily the proper psychological language for this, but what I believe it is we're projecting out into the future, and it's just like a film projector, right? Like a projector, whatever is inside is going to be projected out. And so if you have fear and anxiety, it's going to be projected out, and that's what the future is going to be projected as. So when you project out, you're in this hardship, in this you're trying to endure, and whatever's going to project out is going to be usually the worst case scenario.
Yeah, like
I'm not going to make it. I'm going to go bankrupt, or she's going to leave me, or he's going to leave me.
I was going to say, perfect example. Like if you don't get a job you want, all of a sudden you're like, everyone hates me. I'm never going to get a job.
I'm going to be homeless.
I'm going to be homeless. Like, and this is all going to happen in 3 weeks.
Right,
like, you know
right,
what I
yeah.
mean? And yeah, so it's, I was going to say it's so true, because it's never like, at least for me, whenever I'm going through something, I never project and I'm like my first thought, is never, I don't know. I didn't get this job, whatever. And now it's never, you know what, but there's probably a really good job around the corner.
Right.
And then 5 years from now, I'm going to be middle management. And then, maybe 20 years from now, I'll have a great career, and then I'll be able to retire, and it's going to be awesome. And this won't even matter.
Right.
Like that never is the first thought. The first one's I'm going to be homeless and everyone hates me.
It sucks. No,
yeah.
God hates me.
God hates me.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
That's
you're right.
really good. Yeah.
So I would say, don't try and handle it on your own, but then also don't believe your own thoughts necessarily. Like doubt your own thoughts sometimes, and trust the Lord. Projecting is like it's a natural thing. We do it. It's a natural tendency, but it's not good.
Yeah.
Some people have great they have great outlooks.
Yeah.
Like I know some people, and like the chips don't fall the way they want, and they're just like, man, God is so good. I'm so excited because I cannot wait to see how this is going to turn out. And I'm just like, what?
Yeah.
I'm like loading the gun, putting it in my mouth around the barrel. And they're like, this is so great. And I'm like, yeah, for who?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was going to say, it's so fun. I heard this is to never like trust your brain in these situations. 'Cause like one half is creating BS and the other half is believing it. And it's just the whole cycle. And, in those certain times, at least for me,
yeah,
it's just, there's nothing, I really cannot trust anything that comes out of my own brain, because it's fallen. It's broken.
Well, no, that's a good point.
Yeah.
We're fallen creatures. We don't have, and here's the other thing. It sort of goes back to that same thing about the prayer. Mm-hmm. Like, why isn't God answering my prayer? Well, we don't have all the information. A lot of what God does in our lives is protective. And, we're just rolling through, and we're trying to move to the next thing, and, out of not being content or whatever. And what happens is God's like, I'm putting up obstacles, and you're hitting your head hard, and it hurts, but I'm doing it on purpose, because that's not good for you. It's not best for you. And so a lot of times we misinterpret these situations that we're in. And sometimes, legitimate, like I had cancer, or not me, but like someone gets cancer. That's a bad prognosis. That's a health thing, and God. I don't think that's a situation where God's like putting up a roadblock.
Yeah,
I think it's a natural fallen world we live in, and that's one of the products of it. And it's going to be painful, and there's going to be a lot of questions, and it may not turn out good. It may be the end. But what it should do is turn you back to God. It's a full circle. It turns you back to God, to trust in Him, to know Him, and to lean into Him. There's a great verse about that connects with this. Can I read it out of Hebrews?
Yeah, please.
Hebrews 10:34, and this is one I've always loved this verse. It's 34 and 35, and it starts off. Hold on, I have this new Bible, right? And the pages all stick together. I love that about new Bibles, by the way. It says, when you suffered along with those who were thrown into jail, when you suffered along with those who were thrown into jail, and when all you owned was taken from you, you accepted it with joy. You knew there were better things waiting for you that will last forever. And then this is what I love what he says. He says, So do not throw away this confidence and this trust in the Lord. Remember the great reward it brings you. So, this goes back to what Paul says in Ephesians 6, after having done all to stand. So just keep standing for the Lord, but don't throw away your confidence that God loves you, that God has a plan, that God has a purpose behind these things, and sometimes we can't, and I firmly believe this, sometimes we will never know the purpose until we get to heaven. There will be things left unknown on this earth for whatever reason. Either we can't handle what the reality or the truth is, or it still has to play out. And we're gonna exit this physical world and enter the spiritual realm of eternity before it finishes playing out. Yeah. And so we don't have a need to know. You know what I mean? And it goes back to that other thing. God doesn't owe you an explanation.
Yeah, I was just thinking of Exodus. You know, so when they're in the exile, like how many of the original Israelites actually made it to see the Promised Land?
3.
Yeah,
3 of the originals. Everyone else died in the desert. That's what the whole book of Numbers is about.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it was 2. Joshua and Caleb were the only 2 that saw it. So everyone else died. And it was because they had faith, right? They believed God when they went into Jericho and they were spying out the land. They believed the report of the spies, that it was good, a good report. And so they were given the opportunity to move into the Promised Land. And you're right. That's exactly right. Like, are we going to trust God, have confidence in God, that he's his character? Like, what do we know about him? Well, we know he's faithful, like you were saying. I've been through worse. Well, maybe not worse, but it was the worst up to that point, and he got me through that. So what would make me think that he's not going to be faithful to me now? He's always been faithful. Yeah.
And I don't know. I like this idea that it kind of puts things into perspective in a very humanistic way. And I don't like that word, but
I was like, yeah. You mean humanity? Like
yeah, yeah, I don't know, whatever way. It just it puts things into perspective of the earthly. And you know, it's interesting. I wonder when I'm reading, you know, when you go through all these genealogies, it's fascinating to me when there's entire genealogies that like are obviously important, you know, like in, so here, kind of a question, so correct me if this is wrong or right. So in Jesus's lineage, you know, there's great lengths to make sure that they, that it, you know, it was the correct lineage that he had to come through to fulfill prophecy, right?
Yeah.
Is there anyone in that lineage that is never really talked about in the Bible? That like, they're just like, that's Josephet or something like that, and like that's the only time he's named. So
yeah, for sure.
So to put it back into this personal, this way is, I don't know. Sometimes I think of, it is a double-edged sword because sometimes I think, oh, I'm gonna die alone. I'm never gonna have a wife and kids, you know, like that kind of way. So on a good day, which is most of the time when I'm like, oh, you know, God's got my family taken care of. That's kind of self-depreciating humor. But, you know, it's one of those things where I think it's really interesting that maybe when I'm going through something or, you know, the stuff that never makes sense is it's kind of cool to think, what if I go through life and I just am a good person, you know, and I love Jesus and I do everything I can and I just, you know, live as best as I can. And the best I get is I die and, you know, people are like, he was a good guy, you know, we'll see him up in heaven, you know, that kind of thing. And like, can I be okay with just being a normal average guy, you know?
Yeah.
But I just think of how cool it would be. Like, what if my grandson turns out to be this, you know, hugely important person. And I had, like, would I be okay with just being, an asterisk in some timeline that was used by God to produce this miraculous result, like,
right.
And that might be something that's so, like, that's what I'm saying. I wonder if there's people in Jesus's lineage who, I mean, were directly used by God. Like, God's like, you know,
right.
Not getting into free will, you know, all this stuff, but was used by God to produce Jesus. How cool is that? Like,
to bring
and
forth,
they never knew.
Yeah, right.
Like, they never knew until they're up in heaven, or, you know, wherever the old Jews are. But, you know, I'm just kidding. But, you know, they're up there, and like, then they're finally like, that's so cool. and the recognition doesn't matter.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know if that has to do with suffering, but that kind of gives me hope in some stuff is, you know, am I okay with being, you know, it's like right sized if I can just be used by God, however it is. And maybe, you know, I don't need this miraculous, huge life, or can I be okay with, you know, not being a millionaire or something like that? Because that'd be, you know, if I'm used for God, I don't know. I really, I get a lot of hope out of, in hopeless times when I think of there's people that God used that aren't even talked about in the Bible, but you know, more expanded on.
I mean, we live in a culture where it's uber comparative.
Yeah.
Like everybody has to compare themselves to somebody else and like somebody else. And, you know, and with social media, it's even worse because now you have a view into people's worlds that they permit and they create and they shape it. You know, they delete the bad pictures and put up the great ones. And so, what happens is we buy into that. But there is nothing ordinary about obedience to God.
Yeah.
And that's basically what you're saying. You know, like for you to live a life of obedience to God, it may, from a perspective from the outside, it may seem to be very mundane and nothing too spectacular, but in God's hands, that life is extraordinary because obedience to Him is nothing ordinary. That is extraordinary. And it's very, very powerful. I like to use that story about the triumphal entry when Jesus came into Jerusalem riding on a donkey. And before he does that, he asks a few of the disciples to go get this donkey. And he sends them on the journey. They go out and get the donkey. And I can imagine, like, you know, and it's right around the same time where the sons of thunder are like, hey, can I sit at your left? Can I sit at your right? And like there's a power play happening within the ranks of the disciples. They want to be known as the better ones. And they think Jesus' kingdom is going to be earthly now, you know, and during the time of the Gospels, and they think they're going to have a position there and all of that. And so they're going to get this donkey, and I can imagine they're like, oh, great, Peter gets to go with them walk on water, and what do I get to do? I get to go get an ass, you know, and bring it back, you know. Here's your ass, Jesus, you know, right? I just like saying that because that's what the King James calls it. Yeah. But what they were doing, and I don't know if they realized this at the time, but there was a scripture out of Micah that they were fulfilling. And it was Daniel was speaking of it too. And it was literally a scripture that was hundreds of years previously prophesied they were used to fulfill. They were instrumental in fulfilling a prophecy that was hundreds of years old that was going to earmark Jesus and pinpoint him as the Messiah because of the day that he walked in, or they rode into Jerusalem on the day of triumph. And they were singing the songs to him and laying the palms down, Palm Sunday. And can you imagine, like, you're grumbling about getting sent to go pick up a donkey to bring back to Jesus, and unknowingly you're fulfilling hundreds of years of prophecy because of being obedient. There's no small thing to God that's an obedience. Yeah. There just isn't.
Yeah, and I was going to say, even with the suffering, I don't know. I feel like I would immediately regret this, and maybe I should say, God, I'm not praying for this, so please don't take this as a prayer when I say this.
I love how you preface things with God.
Like what about Job? Like Job was he was used as an example to countless people. His suffering could is used to help many people.
Yeah, every generation.
Even, the suffering, so that's what I was going to say is, God, I don't want to, I couldn't be Job. So don't throw a bunch of stuff on, me, because then I won't be able to handle it like him.
Yeah,
don't use me as an example. But I was going to say, I don't know.
I don't think Satan's going to God on my behalf to say, hey, have you considered Turner?
Yeah,
he's gonna buckle, and God's like, yeah, I know. That's why you're just gonna stay away from him.
Yeah, exactly. And I was gonna say, so maybe to kind of tie it together, how much, I guess, in a kind of practical way, how much of it is, do you think, spiritual? When we're going through suffering, how much of it is spiritual? How much is it practical? Because I know, like, and sometimes I'll get into this thing with me. I remember one time I could not find my wallet, and this sounds so silly and so ridiculous, but I remember like screaming at God, and I was like, Satan, why have you hidden my wallet? And like I could not find it because I needed to get on a plane. Like I had to get to somewhere, and I really needed it. And it was this whole fiasco, and it ended up my wallet got stolen. You know?
Oh wow!
And it was something like that.
There's no way
There's no way I could have done it.
Yeah.
And I just remember, like my immediate thing was like, this is Satan, and that sounds so silly, but
I don't think so. I don't think it sounds silly.
Oh, but yeah. So in a way, you know, how much do you think on a daily basis is like a real suffering? How much of it is spiritual? How much of it is physical? Do you think that there are any, maybe to put you on a spot, any signs that this might be more spiritual? What can be, anything like that? Like maybe it's a demonic attack. Maybe it's something like that. Maybe it's so hard to talk about when it's just general all suffering.
Right. Yeah.
But
well, so here's my thought on that. I think a lot of it is spiritual. And this is my view on suffering, that suffering is permitted by God. Mm-hmm. So it's passed through the hands of God first before it's come into my life. So that means it's got a spiritual connection there. What he uses to allow the whether it's a job loss or a health issue or a relationship thing or whatever, those are just common.
Yeah.
That doesn't matter. That's insignificant in the bigger scheme of things. And like I said, Satan does come in and try and take advantage of a weak, person. Like if you're a wounded lamb, you're easy prey, and that's what he's looking for. He's not looking for the valiant fighter who's going to put up a fight and come back at him, with a sword drawn. He's looking for the limping, broken one that is easy prey that he can pick off. So I think that they're mutual. God has permitted it. Satan wants to take advantage of it, but we've been given instructions to turn to the Lord more, trust in him more. Don't throw away like it said in Hebrews, don't throw away your confidence. You'll be richly rewarded if you do. And that's literally connected to suffering, because he's like, you were thrown in jail and your stuff was taken. Like all your possessions were literally stolen from you.
Yeah.
And you gave it up with joy, and you'll be richly rewarded because your confidence is in the Lord. So persevere through the hardship, trust the Lord in it, and then have people around you, have community around you. It's almost like, here's your blueprint. In the midst of it, some of your help's going to come from comfort from God's word. Some of it's going to come from God's people. Some of it's going to be, there is no comfort. You just need to you just got to get to tomorrow. Mm-hmm. Get through today, and then if tomorrow comes, we'll get to tomorrow. And we'll just keep going that pathway, and rebuke the enemy. Rebuke the enemy and rebuke your flesh. Your flesh is going to want to fight back and be comforted. It's going to want to self-medicate. It's going to want to project. It's going to want to run away. It's going to want to do all the things that we do that perpetuate hardship a lot of times in our lives. Sometimes and even if you get all that stuff down right, you still might have to sit in it for a while.
Yeah. I was going to say, maybe this is being a 30-year-old and going through stuff 30-year-old single guys go through. Is I hate was it Paul that was jailed for 10 years?
He was jailed, several years. He was jailed a bunch of times, but he did spend, I think, 3 years in.
I must be thinking of something else. Well, I'll use a better example.
Joseph was jailed, wrongly jailed in the Old Testament.
I was thinking of. How about the? And I know this is so cliche, but I do get hope out of it. Like Abraham having to wait all the 10 years. Is that 10 years before they were able to have? When they said he was going to.
Oh, for the promise for the child.
Son.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, he had to wait for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, and
he was already like 90.
Yeah. But I was going to say I think it's interesting to remember that our timing is not in God's timing. We can't. Or these are important things for me to remember. God's timing's not my timing, and there's nothing I can do to really do anything about it but draw close. And I was gonna say, I it's one of those things that I hate thinking that it could be 10 years or something like that, you know, like in a practical way of like waiting for all this stuff.
Yeah.
But you know, God eventually showed up, you know, and it was so awesome. And I take a lot of hope in that. But at the same time, I really liked how you said that everything passed through his hands and his, you know, in the way that a sifter, I was just thinking of this, you know, a physical hand with maybe sand's a better idea, because I don't think hands can really keep, water's going to slide around and find its way all the way out anyways.
Yeah, right.
Around a hand. But in the same way that the suffering's allowed to pass through his hand and it's touched by God, you know, and allowed this, I have to think that at some point, and we touched on it earlier, that it's not personalized in a way, but it is personalized in a way.
Oh yeah.
Like where you said, like there's stuff I know that I cannot handle, and well, I don't know that I can't handle it now, because maybe there's stuff I can, but you know what I mean? Like
Right.
There's stuff that God knows the way I'm built, just, you know. So I wonder, and I have to imagine it's so, that there is suffering that God does stop, that I will never know about.
Yeah.
That he does not permit to happen into my life. You know what I mean? Because if he is allowing some stuff, and I don't want to sound callous about this, but, you know, maybe when I die and I look back and I'm like, you know, there is some hard stuff, but overall, you know, God bless, you know, someone else that went through so much more than, you know, I know that I couldn't handle it and they handled it with grace or something like that,
Right,
you know,
yeah.
or I just look and go, I do not know how that happened. And I'm so grateful, you know, maybe for the life I lived, or, you know, whatever. It just makes me think of what God is actually sparing me from that might be down the thing, and he never allows to happen, you know.
Oh
That
yeah.
there's definitely, you know, I do take some hope in that there is stuff that quite possibly could happen to me that God is not allowing to happen. So it's not all, you know, I just don't want this idea of God just going like, you know, throw this at you, like every single thing of suffering is not coming at me. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
There is stuff that is being held back, and
Well,
you know,
two things I would
I
say.
will never know.
Paul says we look through a glass dimly.
Yeah.
So, like I said, we don't have all the insights. And yeah, for sure, God's holding back things that would crush us
Yeah.
out of love.
Yeah.
And he lets the stuff come, and it feels like it's going to crush us, but it strengthens us. If you let it have its course with you, it's all kind of like, you know, Hebrews also talks about God's discipline, right?
Yeah.
Once it's had its way, man, at the end of it all, you praise God, you realize it, and then the next time something comes around, like, you're stronger. Like you were saying, like, I went through something that wasn't as bad as this, but at the time it was the worst thing I've ever gone through. And so that comes back around, you're like, I've been through this before. It's not the end of the world. I surely am going to live. But I'm trying to find and Peter wrote about it, and he basically said, look, man, don't be surprised when these trials and these tribulations come upon you. He says, don't be surprised by them. He says, for they are purposed by God for the perfection of your faith. In other words, your faith is more valuable than silver and gold, and God's going to refine it. In other words, the refining of God is a fire, the flame, that's a representative of heat. Heat is not comfortable, you know, and so to be made more like Christ and your faith to become more pure. In other words, to have pure faith means that I trust solely in God, in Jesus. Solely in Jesus. Not Jesus in my bank account, not Jesus in my wife or my spouse or my girlfriend or boyfriend, not Jesus in some friend, not Jesus in anything else, but just Jesus. And he turns up the heat so much that that's really all you can trust in sometimes. And when you get to that point, your faith is becoming completely refined. And it's a beautiful but very, very ugly place.
Yeah.
It's hard.
Yeah.
It's really hard.
And I was just going to say, it's interesting that, you know, if everything's used for his purpose, like I said, that there's there's stuff that is not going to be useful to me, that is not being allowed to happen. It just makes it more like personable, and I know that, you know, God's with me whenever I go through something, or, you know, that it's it's kind of funny. I don't want to say like it's tailor-made for me. So even, I mean, it is, even in my sufferings, he knows me intimately, and he cares about me specifically.
Absolutely.
For my suffering, that it still is, it's not even just God's the divine watchmaker who sets the universe into motion. It's like even the sufferings that come to me are specifically designed or allowed or touched by God, and
right,
not in not a malicious way, but like, you know what I mean?
It's so much more. He is in you. He's with you.
Right.
Like he's literally,
I mean, he's going through it.
Yeah, he's literally right with you in the midst of it.
Yeah.
Which is so crazy. Like he's like, no, you're not alone.
Yeah.
You're not alone. I know it's hard, but I'm with you, and I'm way bigger than this.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's a great view of it.
I was going to say, it was really interesting. I looked up this, I love this C.S. Lewis quote. I don't know if you've ever heard it before, but pain insists upon being attended to. God whispers to us in our pleasures, speaks in our consciences, but shouts in our pains. It is his megaphone to rouse a deaf world.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. Pain turns you to God.
And that's, yeah.
That's right.
I was going to say, yeah, there's a lot of moments when, you know, the stuff that actually was really bad, you know, sufferings, I can think back, not all, you know, a certain thing definitely came through him with a, you know, I had some cool spiritual experiences at the same time as going through some of the stuff, you know, looking back, being removed by it. Yeah. I'm like, oh, that's something pretty cool that God did in that midst.
Well, I love the promise out of Romans 8:28. He who began a good work in you will carry it out to completion. So it's all part of the process, man.
Yeah.
Living, being, we're headed to a destination. He wants us to be prepared, you know?
Yeah. Well, how about I want to leave it with this, because at the end, and maybe take it back around.
Sure.
Have you ever heard about Saint Bartholomew?
I have heard of him, yes.
Okay, because someone pointed this out to me when I was going through something recently, and it was just one of those things. So at the end of the day, I don't want to, maybe this is kind of in vain, a little bit of some humor to end it up with, but at the end of the day, it could always be worse, because Saint Bartholomew was skinned alive. He was flayed alive. The skin of his body was cut into strips, then pulled off. It left his body open and bleeding for a long time, and then he was beheaded for sharing the gospel. And while he was being flayed, he still was like proclaiming for Christ. So at the end, you know,
that's a rough day.
That's a bad day. I hope that doesn't happen to me, but you know,
right? Me too, Rosie.
Yeah, it could always be worse,
right? Yeah. Because if that happens to you, we're usually around each other. It's probably coming my way too.
Yeah. So,
anyways, that's good, man. I'm glad that you recommended that we talk about this.
Yeah,
that was good. And hey, look, if you're going through it, just hang in there. Don't give up. Persevere. Trust in the Lord. Lean into Him. Reach out to somebody. Tell them you need prayer. You know, and just live for today. Tomorrow's not promised anyway. You got today to live for today, get through today, and let's see what happens tomorrow. Just work it that way.
Yeah, perfect.
You keep that attitude, next thing you know, you'll be on the other side of it. So
you're on the other side of it, whether I was going to say, I want to, even if everything's not okay, it's okay.
Yeah, that's right.
You know, your attitude towards it can change while going through it.
Right.
So I was going to say, you know, you can get through it even if you're not through it yet.
That's right.
You can be over it.
Wise words.
Yeah.
Wise words.
They're not mine, so that's why they're wise.
All right. Well, we'll catch you next time on All Out War. Thanks for listening.
Yeah, thank you.
God bless you.
Stay hydrated.
Stay hydrated.
Thanks for listening to the All Out War podcast today. We hope you enjoyed the episode. If you want to know more, you can visit us on the web at alloutwar.us or you can find us on Twitter at AllOutWarcast. Hey, thanks again for listening, and we'll catch you next time.